Welcome to DMH Brief. I'm Dr. Mazoor Sen. In this segment, we analyze systems that shape our world, economics, politics, geopolitics, and how they affect countries like Pakistan. Of course, the attention is primarily on the conflict zone in the Middle East, and there's an escalation between Iran, Israel, and the US, and thereby the Gulf countries that are hosting American military bases. Apart from that, we are seeing an economic dependence from Pakistan's side on the Gulf countries, with millions of people living and working and sending back remittances. Pakistan and Saudi Arabia also signed a defense pact a few months back. On our western border, there's unrest between Pakistan and Afghanistan. Less than 1 year ago, India and Pakistan fought yet another war. So this is not just a geopolitical issue. It's an economic and strategic stress test for Pakistan. To unpack this, I'm joined by Imtiaz Gul. He's a security analyst, executive director for Center for Research and Security Studies. He has spent decades analyzing militancy, governance, and regional security dynamics. Imtiaz, thank you for joining us today.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for having me.
If we strip down to the fundamentals, is this conflict primarily a geopolitical issue, or do you see it as an economic challenge for Pakistan that could lead to internal instability?
If you look at it from the Israeli American perspective, this is both a geopolitical as well as a geoterritorial issue. The Israeli plan seems to be annexing as much land as possible in its neighborhood as well as beyond its borders. In that endeavor, the United States is totally behind Israel. And that is what has turned it into a geopolitical contest because as they ventured out against Iran, the other Security Council members who wouldn't have liked to give the United States and Israel a free pass in Iran. And that's why Iran has so far resisted and withstood its ground. And we assume that China and Russia have quietly been providing as much support as possible. So, this, in a way, has turned this entire episode into a geopolitical, geoterritorial conflict with deep repercussions for the region as well as the extended region, which also includes India and Pakistan.
But do you see this translating into political instability here, public unrest? We also have rising oil prices, inflation is up, and cost of living for the ordinary citizen is going up. And Pakistan has a very tight economic situation from even before this conflict started. Do you believe that this could cause political unrest? Will people take to the streets? And could the government be in danger? Could the military face some challenges bigger than they have now over the past 2 or 3 years?
I don't see any immediate challenge to the government, no immediate risk of public uprising, because ever since the removal of Imran Khan in April 2022, we saw three different waves of protests, and that basically also took the steam out of the public anger, this movement, the anti military, anti government movement and sentiment. And with the repression that we saw in the last 3 years, both administrative means as well as legal means. So, that I think has created a big deterrence for the immediate future. However, the medium to long term repercussions could be very serious. Number one, we already have an inflationary cycle. Number two, the fuel prices have been jacked up. In the first phase, they were jacked up without any reason whatsoever. But if the supplies run short, then obviously the fuel prices will go up. And it's very logical that once you jack up the fuel prices, everything else becomes more expensive. If the conflict in the Gulf continues for another few weeks, that would mean a severe hit to the economies of those countries, particularly where hundreds of thousands of Pakistanis are working, like in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates. And that could mean that several hundred thousand of them would be forced to return home. That would be an additional burden to the teeming millions who are jobless here in this country. At the same time, Pakistan would lose a very substantial stream of revenue. Pakistan gets, I think, between 21 to 22 billion dollars from within the Gulf countries via the diaspora, the expatriates. If even half of them returned, even one third of them returned, that would mean $7, $8 billion at least off the table for the precarious situation that Pakistan is in economically. Even $1 billion means a lot. We are dependent on the goodwill of the United Arab Emirates, China, and Saudi Arabia for a balance of payment deposit of cumulatively $9 billion. Out of that, I think we owe $3 billion to the UAE, another $3 billion to the Saudi Arabia. So imagine that we are just hanging by a thread, our economy. As a whole, this Israeli American venture against Iran is going to cost people very dearly, as well as the countries would also feel the heat of this economic crisis that this adventure has triggered.
Could translate into people coming to the streets, large demonstrations, and pressure building because people are now facing economic hardship that is beyond what they have experienced maybe for a very long time. The economy has been down for Pakistan for the past 3 years. Could this get out of hand, out of control for the government?
It's very difficult to say at the moment as to whether it would get out of hand, whether it could spin out of control as far as the government is concerned. As far as the external factors are concerned, this government has no threat. It's very much aligned with the geopolitical aspirations of the United States, of the UK, and of their allied countries. That is basically an anti China stance, which aims at dissuading countries like Pakistan from getting very close to China. From that perspective, the Pakistani government doesn't face any immediate risk. The medium to long term risk, however, exists. And that would mean that once people start returning home, once the remittances start drying up, obviously it would increase pressure on people. They will feel the pinch, and then possibly it could gather momentum and people could basically take to the streets to demonstrate. But then the answer is, what will the government do? What options would the government have? So, as a whole, it's a very critical situation for Pakistan as well as for its tens of millions of people who are already living marginalized, according to the World Bank. People are below the poverty line. The number of them has increased to 40%, and 25% of the population hardly can make ends meet. We literally mean 2 meals a day. So that is about 25% of the population. The situation is really adverse and it requires massive intervention, massive correction at the top level in the elitist model of governance, which is a system that is designed to benefit the mighty ones, the affluent ones, more than the marginalized ones. So, this is a system based on injustice and designed in a way that puts the larger majority at a disadvantage vis a vis those who are earning millions every month but don't have to pay taxes. In addition to that, they're enjoying perks and privileges at the cost of common people.
What I hear you say that is maybe there's no external pressure. It suits, especially the United States with the present setup, because they are cooperating with the Americans. Pakistan has had this historic balancing act, the strategic hedging. We have good relations with America. And at the same time, we're trying to balance it out with our relation to China. We have good relation with the Gulf countries. And we also have Iran as a neighbor. We are sharing a long border with Iran. This policy of strategic hedging, is it a policy that we can continue, or do you believe that during this conflict, Pakistan would have to align with one party or the other? Can this conflict be a catalyst for this process?
I doubt that Pakistan would have to take one side or the other. For all practical reasons, Pakistan is at the moment geostrategically anchored into the American scheme of things, which basically support Israel, the state of Israel, which has invaded Iran, which has invaded Gaza, occupied it, which has invaded southern Lebanon, taken over dozens of villages, displacing hundreds of thousands of people, killing over 1,000 Lebanese so far, over 2,000 Iranians so far. And Pakistan is on the board of peace created by the American president. For all practical reasons, Pakistan is very much in the American camp. Whether it can now break away from China in a big way, no, I don't think Pakistan will do that. So it has tried in the past, but this time around, this policy of strategic hedging is monumental, has never been this difficult. However, I think as far as China is concerned, it would also not like to abandon Pakistan just because Pakistan is pro United States or is supportive of what the Americans want in the region. So it is a very difficult balancing act for Pakistan, but Chinese are very much aware that Pakistan has its own limitations. One is financial, the near total dependence on the IMF, and the IMF basically is dependent on a positive nod from Washington, from the White House or the State Department when it comes to lending money to a country like Pakistan. So, as long as Pakistan keeps the White House and the State Department happy and aligns itself with them, the loans from IMF would also keep flowing. Now, the bigger question I think one would pursue is whether this external relevance yields anything for the dominant majority of Pakistan in terms of investment, in terms of employment. That is a huge question. I was going through some files and I saw that Qatar has signed a big deal for defense cooperation and production deal with Ukraine. So, this is the dividend that has come out of this conflict because Qatar has suffered massive losses. Now, Pakistan probably would also want something similar. It's trying to showcase its production, whether it's the Chinese jets or missiles or a lot of other equipment that Pakistan produces, even drones, I think, but probably the Pakistani drones are not in that advanced stage. So that is one element, defense hardware export. But whether this situation as a whole translates into big investment by locals as well as by foreigners, which can help boost the productivity and that then generates employment and creates an surpluses which Pakistan then can use for infrastructure expansion and improving the services. So that is the big question. How much does the external relevance basically translate into internal economic reinvigoration, economic development, and rehabilitation?
But in relation to Saudi Arabia or the Gulf countries and Iran, how would Pakistan be able to balance this out? Do you see that is possible if Pakistan sides with the Gulf countries, which it seems to be doing? Could that have some spillover into Pakistan? Pakistan has a sizable Shia population, and we have some unrest in the Balochistan province also. Do you think those are factors where Iran could come back at Pakistan in case if Pakistan is more actively involved in the conflict?
It's a very difficult situation for Pakistan, both for Pakistan and Iran. On the face of it, Iran is not unhappy with Pakistan. We read that it has allowed another about 20 Pakistani flagged ships through the Strait of Hormuz, which is a huge development. Iranians are very pragmatic people. By allowing a Chinese flagged or Pakistani flagged ship, they're also collecting tolls. It's another source of revenue. So, this is something new that any ship passing through this strait has to then pay a passage fee. Iranians are very pragmatic, and that's why they have allowed the Chinese and the Pakistanis to pass through the strait. However, whether this impacts Pakistan's relations with Saudi Arabia, I don't think so. Iranians are also very cognizant of the fact that the majority of Muslim countries are Sunnis and they are intrinsically anti Iran. And this is nothing new. We remember there was a counterterrorism coalition force raised by Saudi Arabia and headed by Pakistan's former Army Chief General Rahil Sharif. And now again, Saudi, Pakistan, Turkey, and Malaysia probably are trying to create another force, another alliance. But that could have repercussions for relations with Iran, because whether it was the former coalition against terrorism or the quartet that is being talked about, it doesn't represent the Shia Muslims.
With the Shia population in Pakistan, do you see any development there in their relation to the state and their loyalty to Pakistan if Pakistan is more actively involved in this conflict?
Logically, the Shia population of Pakistan should not be looking up to Iran. As long as they're citizens of Pakistan, for them, the interests of Pakistan should be supreme, not those of Iran. Obviously, ideologically, faith wise, this population looks up to Iraq and Iran for spiritual guidance. But spiritual relation and the need for safeguarding your national interests are two different things. I would be surprised if the Shia population in Pakistan starts agitating for Iran, because we also have to be very clear. Iran has been behind a number of proxy militant groups in the Gulf, whether it's in Yemen, whether it's in Syria, whether it's in Kurdistan. So there is a long history of Shia having supported militant proxy groups, and one would hope this something like this doesn't happen in Balochistan as a part of retribution by Iran for Pakistan's alliance with Saudi Arabia and with the United States. This is a big challenge because of Balochistan is already very restive, insecure, and our 900, roughly 1,000 kilometer long border with Iran is porous, is very inhospitable, and the Baloch militants, anti Pakistan militants, and anti Iran militants, Sunni militants, they all operate within that inhospitable terrain. So it's a common challenge for both Iran and Pakistan. And if either of the countries wants to destabilize the other or use proxies against the other, it's not a big deal. And that is something that Pakistani authorities shall have to guard against. You were talking about strategic hedging. This is an absolutely essential in interstate relations or in multilateral relations, because after all, when you need to be defended, you don't really depend on outsiders. Look what has happened to the Gulf countries, despite so many American military bases. They've been getting hit one after the other. Even American military has been losing its equipment. I think another $1 billion loss a couple of days ago. The air fuel tankers have been hit by the Iranians. This kind of attrition, I think, one has to avoid, and Pakistan shall have to actually be extremely careful in not becoming a direct part of this conflict to avoid any backlash from the Shia population within Pakistan.
Pakistan also has a defense pact with Saudi Arabia, signed just a few months back in September 2025. There was a recent interview with a Saudi Arabian political analyst, Salman al-Ansari, who said that Saudi Arabia may activate this defense pact. In that interview, he also mentioned that Saudi Arabia would be covered by Pakistan's nuclear umbrella in case of a widening of the conflict. Do you see that happening if this defense pact is activated? Would Pakistan actually be able to honor that defense pact? We have unrest on the Afghan border, we have a conflict with India, and just a year back we had yet another war. Do you see Pakistan being able to honor that defense pact? And what would that include? Would it really include the nuclear umbrella?
I think Defense Minister Khaja Asif had already said that because we are in this pact with Saudi Arabia, so if push came to shove, we shall have to basically fulfill our commitment. So that was, I think, the first categorical statement coming from the defense minister. So until then, until that statement, nobody had really believed in what was being talked about as far as the Pak Saudi defense strategic agreement is concerned. But now, after the defense minister's statement, it became clear that yes, there something exists, and if called upon, it shall have to be operationalized. Once it is operationalized, it will really entail severe consequences, severe regional political consequences for Pakistan, because it would pitch Pakistan against Iran, with which Pakistan has this long border. Pakistan is not contiguous to Saudi Arabia. So, this is a very strange and complex situation that Pakistan finds itself in. One would hope that it doesn't get to a situation where Pakistan is now called upon or dragged into this conflict. Israel is already doing what Saudi Arabians probably want. Israel and America are fighting for the rest of the countries. I think this is about time that whether it's Saudi Arabia or United Arab Emirates to open communication channels with Iran directly in order to tell them that, okay, give us some time and we will consider start thinking about how to get rid of the American bases there, because this is one of the major demands by the Iranians, just to evacuate all the American military bases from these Gulf countries. The Gulf countries have probably also realized that whether they have a pact or not with one country or the other, they are vulnerable. The American military bases in these countries were supposed to be the security umbrella for them, but it did not turn out to be the security umbrella. On the contrary, they have become a liability. So, whether it's a nuclear umbrella or conventional security umbrella, it doesn't help if you yourself are not able to defend yourself. That's why I think the issue of nuclear umbrella, this is something one would hate to talk about. The United States has the privilege of being the only country to have dropped or used nuclear bombs ever. So one should not really talk about that. And I personally think that when Pakistan went for that defense pact with Saudi Arabia, the primary motivation for that was probably attracting some investment, some business deals with Saudi Arabia. It hasn't come to that. I was reading a Financial Times article which quotes some Pakistani officials saying that the expectation was to get some investment, but now it seems that it is becoming a problem for Pakistan having entered into that agreement. And that obviously creates complications if it really gets more intense, more hostilities within the next few days. So that will really put Pakistan to test.
Pakistan has had a hate love relationship with America during the Afghan war against the Soviet Union. We were very close, then America abandoned Pakistan, and then we're close again on the war on terror. Right now, Trump has his favorite field marshal in Pakistan, and there are very good relations between Pakistan and the states right now. But at the same time, just a few days back, the Director for National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, in the US, grouped Pakistan alongside with North Korea, Iran, China, Russia, And they mentioned that Pakistan is developing intercontinental ballistic missiles that could reach the US mainland. Is this actual ambitions of the Pakistani military, or do you believe this is part of the do more policy that Pakistan has been facing on off for many years?
Pakistan US relations have mostly been transactional, number one. Number two, both establishments, military establishments, have traditionally enjoyed good relations. However, the institutional memory in Washington says that the humiliation in Afghanistan was because of the boys. When they talk about the Pakistan military, so they use the word boys. So they say that our humiliation in Afghanistan during the war on terror, the Operation Enduring Freedom, was largely because of the boys. They never forgot that. So this is very much part of the conversation, the American conversation, when talking about Pakistan. And that's why they've been very clear that they will not build up relationship with Pakistan more than required. And this has been the policy since 2020 or so. So whatever Tulsi Gabbard said, the Director of National Intelligence, and whatever the CIA people have been saying about Pakistan, they have a certain strategic objective in engaging Pakistan, but they have at the same time apprehensions about this country, and this ballistic missile or nuclear program has always been on their agenda. It's nothing new. This is what needs to be realized in Pakistan, that the Americans will never forget what happened to them in Afghanistan, which is attributed to Pakistan's support for the Afghan Taliban, for Pakistani army support and engagement with the Afghan Taliban. That's why we should not worry about what Tulsi Gabbard said. What we should worry about whether Pakistan can stand on its own with the help of the Chinese, which are the ultimate target of the Americans, of the entire Western alliance. And how independent can we go of the IMF and the United States? Look, from the United States, Pakistan has got nothing in the last 4 years except this legitimacy that they got, that regardless of how controversial the vote of no confidence against Imran Khan was, how disputed the elections of February 2024 were, the Americans haven't given anything to Pakistan in terms of finances other than green signaling the IMF loans. So, this is a big question for Pakistan to ponder, for the Pakistani elites, as to whether they are concerned only about their own survival as long as they are in the offices, or whether they want to take this country or put this country on path of self-sufficiency, a path that has to be charted from within with corrections, with massive reforms in the governance system, rather than indulging in these transactional alliances, sometime with Saudi Arabia or sometime with the United States. It's a very critical moment for this country to avoid medium to long term unrest, demonstrations. The countries have seen civil wars when economic adversity grows and people feel marginalized, people feel disenfranchised. So, this is, I think, a very critical moment.
But do you see this realization in the Pakistan military political setup that we need to be more self-sufficient, less dependent? We need to develop our economy, our society. Do you see that kind of realization?
We see this urge for investment. We see the urge for development, economic development. But sadly, the tools that the civil military elites deploy are very much embedded, anchored in the colonial mindset. So the militaries don't develop countries. They do not. In our country, we have defense housing authorities The army is very good in discipline. This is what they learn: command and obey. It's a typical regiment approach, but you don't run societies with regimented approaches. You need inputs from the civilians. You have to be flexible in dealing with human beings. Dealing with soldiers is different from dealing with citizens of a country. Fixing a unit, a brigade issue is entirely different from fixing the structural issues of an economy. So they are two different things. And that's why I would say the sooner the better that Pakistan army, Pakistani civilian autocrats, they realize that somehow they've had enough and that they need to create now space for economic development, for inclusion, for giving people a sense of empowerment and sense of inclusion in the policy and decision making.
One final question I would want your input on. You can't talk geopolitics for Pakistan or security issues without mentioning India. Operation Sindoor, which was started by India less than a year ago, is temporarily stopped. Modi has repeatedly said that we have not finished that operation. With Pakistan's involvement in the Gulf countries, with Iran on the other side, unrest with Afghanistan, how is Pakistan going to manage all this, and could India see the opportunity if Pakistan gets involved in the Middle East conflict? Would that be a good opportunity for India to strike on our eastern border, do you think?
Let's wrap up this conversation with the thoughts that Pakistan shall have to look away from the security prism. It has to stop looking at issues from the security prism and think more on whether this country is sustainable, regardless whether India attacks it or not. Whether it loses a battle, a war, or whether it wins a war or battle with India. The issue is, can this country be self sustaining? And I posit a question a couple of European diplomats asked me during Ramadan, that Pakistan's border with India has been closed for nearly a year after the Pahalgam terrorist incident. Pakistan's border with Afghanistan has been closed since 11th October after a couple of big terrorist attacks. Iran is in a state of war, so that border is also short circuited at the moment. These diplomats asked me, how is Pakistan going to develop? How is Pakistan going to provide relief, good quality of life to more than 250 million people? So that is the primary issue. You can upend a rival with the support of China, but you cannot trump that rival economically. So 1 week of war, 1 week of tension, which basically requires military mobilization, can drain this economy, which is already drained. So that's why what is of monumental importance for all Pakistani ruling elites is to think how to put the development, the growth lens, and look at things instead of defining Pakistan's problems through the security lens, which means more investment and more focus on how to protect this border rather than how to develop the area within this border. How
This
to
would be from the Pakistani perspective, but wouldn't it be an opportunity for India to strike Pakistan, do you think? Or
I
would
don't think
India
Indians are
hold?
stupid. Tasted something and they realized also the international odds were against them, particularly American President Donald Trump, the way he made fun of India and fun of Narendra Modi. So I think that chapter is closed, regardless of what Narendra Modi says. I don't think they would venture, particularly when they know that maybe the Pakistani and American militaries are cooperating. So I think this will be suicidal for the Indian government to indulge in such an endeavor.
If this conflict continues another few months, what do you believe are the biggest challenges for Pakistan over the next 12 to 24 months?
I think Pakistan's challenges will be financial, it will be economic. So we really need a big turnaround, think away from security and focus more on development initiatives. We have this Special Investment Facilitation Council, but when this council is also led and dominated by the military personnel, I don't know whether that is the recipe to extricating Pakistan from this perennial economic crisis. We really have to think differently if we want this country to develop and be at a par with countries like Indonesia, like Malaysia. For that, we need people of integrity, selfless people who are given more to the national interest than to self interest.
Imtiaz, thank you for joining us,
Thank
and
you.
we'll see you on the show again some other time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.